Hello, everyone. My name is Adam Pellegrini, Director of the Columbia School of Social Work Writing Center, and I'm so excited for today's event, Writing a Book, Writing Lives Roundtable, which I helped organize along with my fantastic co-planner, Professor Chin Gao. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Dean Melissa Begg, who became the 18th Dean of Columbia School of Social Work in September 2019. Dean Begg is an accomplished population health scientist and academic administrator, serving in prior leadership roles, including as Columbia University's Vice Provost for academic programs. She has been gracious enough to moderate this series since our first roundtable in spring 2020. She has thoughtfully facilitated conversations on writing with themes ranging from generative AI to social work practice to funding and much more. Dean Begg, we're so appreciative to have you here again as our moderator, and I will pass it off to you.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this latest installment of CSSW's Writing Lives Roundtable series, in which our accomplished colleagues take part in discussions about their lives as writers. Today, our panel of really superb faculty colleagues will discuss their approaches, challenges, and strategies for success as writers. But today's focus I'm very excited about is on writing and editing books. This is something we haven't touched on before. Now, as we all know, reading has become increasingly fragmented with what seems like an onslaught of online intrusions in our lives. But really, books remain a hallmark of focused learning and a potent way for social work practitioners and scholars to influence the field and the public. Now, books are big enough to capture most complex ideas and to gather a host of different voices on a given subject. And they also carry an aura of authority. I think that's why so many of us are interested in this topic. Now, it's no surprise, many of us have thought about publishing a book, though that feels kind of daunting given the resources and the energy required, and that's what we're going to learn about today. We're hoping that this discussion will offer insights into what it takes to develop a book from writers who've been through the process themselves. And we hope that you find inspiration for pursuing your own book projects that might amplify the impact of your work and experiences. So I do want to say thank you again to my amazing colleagues, Writing Center Director Adam Pellegrini and Professor Chin Gao for organizing this important panel and for everything they do for our community. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Your presence affirms that you too see writing as an essential part of social work practice across fields and methods, as well as a tool for advocacy while securing support for projects that will meaningfully impact the populations with whom we engage. So hopefully this will shed light on some new strategies and approaches that you can adopt in your own work. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists and then invite them to make a few opening remarks. First is Dr. MASHURA Akilova. She's a senior lecturer in discipline at the Columbia School of Social Work, and she teaches courses in social welfare policy, international social development practice, and IPP. Dr. Akilova's research investigates the challenges that families face in Central Asia, including the impact of child labor and the migration of fathers to become migrant workers. With practical experience in strategies to prevent school dropout, promote inclusive education, and study labor markets, both domestically and internationally, Dr. Akilova has conducted qualitative studies on child labor and the impact of microfinance programs around the world. She's also the co-editor of the 2023 book, Integrative Social Work Practice with Refugees, Asylum Seekers, and Other Forcibly Displaced Persons. Glad that you're here, MASHURA. Next is Dr. NEERAJ Kaushal. Dr. Kaushal is Professor of Social Policy at CSSW and Associate Dean for Doctoral Education. She's been a valued member of our faculty since 2002. An economist and journalist by training, she's an expert on comparative immigration policies. She's also a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a research fellow at the Institute of Labor Economics. Her current research includes topics such as labor market impacts of foreign-trained registered nurses and physicians, the impact of local policies on the health and mental health of undocumented immigrants, the effect of Syrian refugee crisis on electoral preferences in Turkey, and so on. She is also the author of a book, 2019 brought us Blaming Immigrants, which investigates the core causes of rising disaffection towards immigrants globally and assesses the validity of the common complaints against immigration. Last, and certainly not least, I am very pleased to introduce Professor Lauren Taylor, a senior lecturer here at CSSW. She is also a graduate of the first cohort of Columbia's Oral History Master of Arts program. Professor Taylor has been on staff for many years at the Service Program for Older People, SPOP, a mental health clinic for older adults. Professor Taylor gives seminars and workshops on a wide variety of mental health issues related to the aging process, with a focus on the therapeutic use of narrative. And as an oral historian, Professor Taylor has conducted dozens of life history interviews with older adults, both in the United States and abroad, and is studying the subjective experience of aging through the medium of narrative in a cross-cultural context. She is the author, along with our other colleague, Dr. Adam Wee, of the upcoming 2025 book, Narrative Therapy with Older Adults, Stories, Wisdom, and Resilience. I'm so proud to be among you today and glad that you've joined us. And so I'd like to offer each panelist the opportunity to say a few words of welcome to each of you and about their work. So MASHURA, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much. It's such a privilege to be here with everyone to share the work that I had a pleasure on, a book rather. I had a pleasure of working with my co-editor, Dr. Nancy Murakami, and also learn from both of my colleagues here. It's interesting how the selection has worked because it looks like we have a range of topics, approaches, and different areas of social work practice. And I'm very happy to be also learning from both of you. I thought that I would start with talking a little bit about the idea of the book because it seems like many of the questions that came from the audience members today focused on how do you even start working on a book. Mine is more of a textbook. So the idea and inspiration really came both from the field and what was happening around mid 2015 when I started teaching full time and thinking about an idea of a practical class for social workers who were planning to be practicing within the humanitarian emergencies work with displaced population. And I had some experience, but not experience on every area of practice within this field. And a couple of years before that, I had been introduced to a colleague who is also an alum, Dr. Murakami, who was teaching clinical classes, and I was focusing more on a policy level classes. So we thought, why shouldn't we combine our expertise and bring each other and use our own resources, knowledge, and skills to support each other in classrooms to provide a more holistic support to students who are planning careers in this field, because most of the time in international settings, social work is not siloed. It is not practiced in policy, specifically in clinical or in administration like we do here. It's where they do everything at the same time and perhaps also practice more integratively. So we were lucky to have an offer to then work on a book that on the topic on this expertise that we both had, and we thought while teaching these classes there was no resource that could easily provide everything that we wanted to provide to students in our classroom. So that's how the book was really, the idea for the book was born, that coincided with everything that we were teaching in the classroom. So I'll stop there, but now looking forward to hearing from NEERAJ and Lauren.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, MASHURA. NEERAJ, welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm NEERAJ Kaushal. I work on immigration and related issues. I'm honored to be in this panel. to listen to the stories of how writing affects our lives and how writing matters to us. How do we engage in writing books? I work on, as I said, on immigration, which is like a hot button issue. Everybody has an opinion on it. Everybody in the United States is thinking about it. This is a topic which is not just, uh, in the news headlines in the US, but all across the world. I write on immigration because this is part of what I do. My research is substantially on immigration related issues, and I write on this topic. And I've written a book, and I'm working on another book, which is with the publishers. And I think I want to join the discourse on immigration. I want to expand my own understanding of immigration and see how it affects lives, and maybe in some small ways, see if I can uh, influence thinking on immigration. So glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'll stop here.
Wonderful, Neeraj. Thank you. Lauren, welcome to our session.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for inviting me today. When I graduated from Columbia's social work school in 1994, I had no idea at the time that I would get another degree in oral history from Columbia because that program didn't exist. But I've always been passionate about narrative. In fact, my kindergarten report card said, "Lauren enters the room every day with her cheerful, you know what, and proceeds to launch into a narrative." My daughter said, "In our family, we narrate our lives." And I was walking across the campus one day in 2007, and there was a poster on College Walk that said, "New program, oral history, who should apply?" And among the list of people who should apply were social workers. And it just jumped out at me because I've been doing clinical work with older adults for many, many years since I graduated, and teaching at the social work school since 2004. And narrative has been such a big part of my work, listening to people's stories, that I thought I have to do that program. And my goal was never to leave social work behind, but to combine the two. One of my colleagues called me bilingual in social work and oral history. I really like that term. And the current book that I've been working on with Professor Mui came about, and I'll make this as brief as possible. Ada Mui spoke at a conference in Hong Kong before the pandemic. And a social worker from the university there came up to her and said, "Can I come to Columbia and be your fellow?" And she did, Esther Chow, and brought with her a proposal for a book for Columbia University Press that they thought was too limited. And Ada called me and said, "Can we talk about this, and maybe we can make this into something broader?" And I said, "What about narrative therapy in the East and the West?" And that was sort of the birth of the book, with Ada being the sort of bridge between Esther and me. And it's been a lot of work, but it's worked very well. So thank you.
Terrific. That's a great story. Thank you, everybody, for the introductions, which are very intriguing. I know that among our audience currently, and those who submitted questions ahead of time, they'd like to get into the nitty-gritty, but I want to take a few minutes to go to the big picture, if I could. And I just want to confess how deeply impressed I am by all of you. I'm just thinking about the courage and the endurance it takes to write a book. So can you give us a few words, each of you, on how you approach such a monumental task and how you kept yourself going throughout that task? Because I can imagine many points along the way you might want to say, "Oh, forget it, I enough of this." But anyway, in any order, whoever wants to jump in.
I can start because I had a particular experience with this. I was very excited about doing this book. And I wrote a couple of chapters. We got our contract and everything, and I wrote a couple of chapters in January of 2020. And in the very, very beginning of March, I got deathly ill with COVID. And I had long COVID, and I just couldn't write for like a year. I couldn't write. And when I went back to writing, I sat down one day and I wrote 6 double-spaced pages, and I was like, yes, this is great. I can do this. And I went back to check a reference from one of my previous chapters, and I had written almost exactly the same thing that I had already written. Anyway, I had to throw that out and start all over again. So that was my initial experience. But I think just the passion for the subject is really what kept me going. So.
Thank you. I don't know, Neeraj, MASHURA, any thoughts? MASHURA.
Yeah, I can share. I think when we were given this proposal, we're given options to write the book, the two of us, the two co-authors, or to edit a book and then contribute the chapters. And for the purpose of, what we wanted to have, we decided to go with as many authors as possible to not only represent the expertise of all those great people who are doing amazing work in the field, but also to bring voices from different regions and different cases that were integrated and different areas of practice. Because again, when we were looking for the materials for our own courses, we struggled to find something that is as inclusive. It was mostly focused on one context, which never worked in different international settings. So that's how we decided in terms of, how we wanted to write. But in terms of the challenges, I think, Lauren, I can connect with you because we also started working during the pandemic, and it was like the pandemic baby in a way, because everything was like we were in the lockdown when we started, like was the whole process of proposal, then coming up with the ideas of what skills we wanted to include, what type of knowledge, and trying to really be inclusive in terms of the geography, the practices, and that took a little bit of time. But what really helped writing was the community. I reflect on that time, and we are in other projects together with Nancy and some other students. We brought in some students as editorial assistants, and I feel like that has been the best team or group I have been in, because I think there were multiple distractions happening, of course, life happening, work happening, and other stuff. But this regularity, we would make like maybe twice a week, right? Where first we devoted certain time, like the writing block, where we started maybe 15-20 minutes. Sometimes it would go to a whole hour, where we would check in with each other, because everyone was in that space where they needed the community to be connected. So I feel like it saved me in a way to go during this difficult time, and it was in a way a blessing. So that also included accountability, support, working within this community of not only the editorial team, but also all the authors who have been contributing. I feel like they could say the same thing.
Hey, thank you. Neeraj, what kept you going?
So I actually now realize that what MASHURA earlier said, that we are a very interesting panel. We are all very different and bring very, very different experiences. I have always written just by myself. Even when I have co-authors, we don't sit together and write. My writing space is just me and my writing. And for me the challenge when I'm writing or thinking of a book is there are two things in a book. One is the content and the style. It's the content that's as challenging for me, where I'm thinking, okay, there's so many people writing books, there's so much to read. Is there a space for the book that I want to write? What is it that I'm saying that's novel? What is it that I'm saying that's original? And then most of my work is all research based. So then once I have some rough idea of the originality of the topic, I'm very excited about it. So I start talking to people about, whether they are challenging me, and then they start some of the other, my friends and colleagues who work on immigration. And what I like to hear from them then is that how they get shocked and challenged by my views, and then I try to address what they are saying uh, through research or other ways. Uh, One of the things that I like to do in the beginning, which I think every writer probably does, is write an outline, whether try to do as detailed an outline as you can. And whether you follow it or not is a different thing. But what I find is that that outline kind of gives me space to think about what exactly, where am I going? Is there a book here or there's no book here? And then a big part of it is research. So all of it is like really the content. Uh, then of course, do I have the style? Do I have the ability to actually write all that stuff in a language that make it a page turner? Whether people would be able to. So uh, that has become somewhat easy now since I've been writing for some time, but it's really the biggest challenges or an originality of the thought. Uh, does it make sense? And whether anybody would be interested in it. Am I saying something different from what has already been said many times by others? So these are some of my challenges. I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear from your different perspectives, how you approach an issue like this. And one question that's popped into my head listening to your answers is, how do you make the I think we all have experience writing shorter form sorts of things. And I wonder, what was the inspiration? How do you know you're ready to move from a short form into sort of more of a longer form to fill an entire book? Was that a difficult thing to figure out, or was there something that kind of clued you into when you'd reach that point?
I think for me, it was kind of the global vision of what this would be from the very beginning. We certainly had to modify it. We've had to tweak it. I think in our book, it's a good balance because Professor Chow is more of a researcher, and I'm definitely a diehard clinician. So the whole first part of the book is about her research, and there are graphs and things like that. And mine is more notes from the field. I think as a clinically writing about clients is always tricky because of having to change details and things like that to protect confidentiality. So when I write, I start out by just writing as I would talk it, as I would tell it, and then I have to go back. I think for me, the editing process is the torturous part more than the writing part. I don't know how the rest of you feel.
Yeah, how do you feel about that?
May I? So for me, it's not so much about going from an article to a book. It's more about the research articles that I write are mostly very, very focused on a narrow topic where there is a hypothesis and I'm trying to prove that. A book, from my research to a book, becomes more of a holistic issue, a larger issue which cannot be grappled in an article, which is just about trying to test a hypothesis, trying to see what the data is saying. Is more about what are the various dimensions of the issue. In this case, let's say immigration is bringing to us. There is political, economic, demographic. Again, I mean, there could be so many aspects of immigration that one can write, but then in each of them, what are the various dimensions? So in that sense, in some ways, you're right, Melissa, in the sense that how do you move from an article form to a book, whether you actually have that much material to cover, but at another level, it's about, it's a much larger, you have a much larger field. You are looking at various dimensions of an aspect, and that lends a much bigger frame, which could be in the form of a book.
Right. And if you wanted to add, MASHURA, I think you sort of introduced
yeah. I think Neeraj said it all, like when you have a lot more to say than on concrete topic, that you want to explore the different aspects of the topic, and you just need more space, right? And in our case, in our book, it was a collection. You couldn't think about collections of articles by different authors. So in a way, like it is a book, but was the contribution of many.
Yeah, it made sense the way you set that up, that you wanted many voices, and so that makes a perfect segue. In terms of starting out to write your books, was there a book on your shelf or books on your shelf that inspired you, thinking, there's one that I could use as a model, and how did that help you, if there did exist such a thing?
I think for me, it all the literature that I have read, people like Arthur Frank, on the therapeutic use of narrative, combined with my own experience of using narrative, I would say, thinking about how I use narrative in my clinical work and how in my pure oral history work there is a therapeutic benefit to it. But I think I've been inspired by a number of quotes, and even more in a sense than books themselves. I often think about the poet Audre Lorde wrote letters to her therapist, and in one of them she said, "Some part of my journey is yours too," which is something in my clinical work I think of. There's a quote by Carol Stadaker, who wrote a book on grieving, and I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. But each time I tell my story, I remove one bit of hurt from inside me. I ease my wound. So I think that things like just the things that I teach, the things that I think about when I'm either doing clinical work or oral history work, in terms of, let's say, listening to trauma narratives, I just kind of divided those up into chapters. And then I had to add one about telehealth, because when we got the book contract, we weren't doing that, but now we are. So I would say that's how I organized this broad topic.
It's helpful, and I am an inveterate quote collector, so I'm going to be writing those down. Yeah, MASHURA, Neeraj, anything to add to that?
Well, I have several books on my shelf. I don't know whether any one of them, I don't know whether I'm even capable of writing any of those great books. So I do get influenced by a lot of writers, and I feel very small when I think about all those books. But I wanted to write, or always my desire is to write something which has a much larger canvas, which goes beyond the narrow confines of my discipline, to be able to reach out to people at a larger level, and to be able to change the discourse of a subject which is so important in our political and economic lives. And also, at some level, I like to talk about it from the voices of the people themselves. So in my books, I try to bring in the voices of migrants, and the voices of mostly people who are most upset about migration. So I like to bring their voices on and try to say that I'm actually looking at issues from their perspective to see how it impacts them. I don't know whether that answered your question or not.
Yeah, that was helpful.
I guess like I am with you on all of this. Like there are so many books and writers, but I think mostly for us it has been our own practice in this field, and just observing all the bad behaviors, right, and all the harm that may have been done, and the desire and motivation was to really try to get it right, to ensure that whenever someone new who is going into this field ends up being in this new context, does not have to learn it through mistakes, so that we can offer as much preparation as possible. But I think a couple of the things that we have been considering of how to make it practical by bringing the stories of the displaced people, and of course many of the books books written, a couple that come to mind that have been like in this great storytelling form, that have been shared, like, you know, by the stories of the refugees like Kite Runner. The Persepolis, like all coming from a little bit like, you know, from my region, that have influenced me in thinking about how do we integrate more of the voices of people with the experience.
Thank you for that. Community and voices keeps coming up in this discussion. So that makes a lot of sense. We are getting a lot of very specific questions about how do I get underway with this? So we're hearing questions about, do you have a book? How do you get a book contract? Do you need an agent? How do you identify a publisher and an editor? So that's a big set of questions. And so I just wonder if each of you could comment on how you approach that task, and with a view to advising some folks in the audience who appear to be contemplating the same thing.
I can take that. So you don't have to have an invitation. If you have a book idea, you write a proposal. The proposal is generally starts with a succinct précis of what the book is going to be about. And then you start writing about what the various chapters are going to be like. And if it's a co-authored book, at the end, you actually mention what do you bring to that book and what does the other authors bring to the book. While you're doing all of that, I think you want to have somewhere think about what would be the readership of this book. You want to think something about what is new that you're bringing to this subject, to this area, and what has been known and what has not been known. So this entire process of writing the proposal actually helps me think through what exactly I'm going to do. Oftentimes, it helps if it's a solo authored book to actually write a couple of chapters that actually gives you the idea of how am I going to advance through this book. It would be a good idea to have someone read the proposal to give you feedback. You don't normally need an agent to write a university book. If you are going to a non-university, non-academic book, you might need an agent, because some of these really top publishing houses, they would look at the book only if you have an agent. The agent basically, takes a look at your proposal, maybe give some feedback to you, but actually also go around, circulating your proposal to various publishers to get their feedback, whether they're interested, whether they're not interested. On the other hand, if you're only interested in a university publisher who actually, it could be a trade topic. It doesn't have to be an academic book. It could be a trade book, and you are interested in a university press, you can just submit the proposal to several university presses and see what feedback you get from them.
So it's okay to submit it to a number of different publishers at the same time?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And again, yeah.
That's good to know. And I'm going to ask each of you too, who was your publisher for the Blaming Immigrants book, NEERAJ? Was it
Columbia University Press. Yeah.
Columbia University Press. Okay, good. Yeah, Lauren.
I've been lucky because I've been invited for all the things that I've written, but one thing that was extremely helpful, not for this book, but for a chapter that I have in a book on narrative and social work practice, is that the late Anne Burek-Weiss and I started a narrative social work group that was just in the beginning, just get together, have some, wine and cheese and talk about our work in the context of narrative. And so as a group, we got the idea of writing the book that we wrote. And that was extremely helpful. For the current book, we had an outside editor. Columbia is the publisher, but we had an outside editor, and that was really, really helpful, because at first I think we were kind of floundering, especially because, Esther and I had never met each other. We were communicating on WhatsApp. English is not her first language. Ada was extremely helpful in being the bridge between us, but bringing in this outside editor was very, very helpful.
And how did you
So,
identify that person, that editor?
this was somebody who made a new, and that's how she came in.
Okay, so talk to other people, again, back to community and how they do that.
Exactly. Yeah, I think the idea of having a community, because writing during the pandemic also was very isolating. So
Yeah, yeah. And I miss Anne Bureckwise. I enjoyed that book, so thank you. Yeah. Mashura, how did you get yours underway?
I think we were also very lucky to have my co-editors, I think dissertation chair, who was the editor for the series, Springus series, who knew about the work that she was doing and invited us to submit a proposal. But even then, I think we got a lot of feedback because she was a social worker, she was a clinician, and that was really helpful for further considering the tweaks that we needed to make in order to, get this approved. The same way, I think folks were talking about the editors, I think they are essential. We made a conscious choice of inviting some of the students, and we know they were brilliant. And I should shout out to Bethel, Saul, and Ghazal, who were back then MSW students. So we invited them to do the editing because we knew about both their work and their passion and the experience in the field. And they have been incredibly helpful, especially, English is not my first language. So, I would go through the content, but they would be doing a lot of support, especially for authors for whom English was not their first language as well. And they went through, I think we went through 5 rounds of edits, not only for the writing, but also the content. And them being students was really helpful because the audience was the students, right? So we were writing the textbook for students, and they would bring some of the things that we would have missed coming from our perspectives as teachers, of being a little bit on this side of the desk, right? So that was really helpful. And I see a question here in terms of whether you need to have your audience in mind to ensure how you write, and that is definitely a yes, right? I have been also trained as a journalist at some point in my career, and one of the things that I learned was to really write succinctly, right, in simple language for broader audience, because people don't have time, patience, or they wouldn't understand the jargon. And that is something that I always recommend, even in policy writing when teaching or generally. But that means for me that the process is very slow, because I have to think several times to get that one sentence in that short form. So you would definitely have to have your audience in mind. So if you're writing for academics, they would want to know about your methods, your all the details. If you're writing for a broader audience, they don't care about all of this. Probably they want to know the essence of what you want to share, right? And depending on the type of the book, then your style will be very different as well. So yeah.
Thank you. You've all spoken about feedback. I'm intrigued by what you said. Mashura, you're writing a textbook, so getting feedback from our students are terrific, right? And so getting feedback from them along the way. I'm wondering about how each of you incorporated stages of feedback, and who would you reach out to? Lauren, you mentioned this narrative group, narrative social workers fans, but do you have advice for our listeners on how they could form such a group, or how do you get started with that?
I can say for myself, in the beginning, when I first wrote, and I had an editor who, first of all, said, this can't be more than 20 pages. So it was like, what do I do with all this other wonderful material? And in fact, Ada said to me, well, then next time this is going to be your own book. But I found myself internally bucking at first. It was kind of like, wait a minute, this is how I write, you know. But when I sort of went with the process, which I knew I had to do, I found it extremely helpful to have other perspectives on my writing. And there were cases where I held my ground and I was like, no, this is how I want to say it. But I do think that having a third eye is really, really critical.
Yeah, thank you. Neeraj, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the book that I've just written, it's with the publishers. It is about the future of immigration in the U.S. And I'm looking at a demographic lens, and I'm looking at way in the future in another 50 years. And the provocative, main line of the book is that it's in Africa. So it's really the future of America is in Africa. And I got a lot of pushback from some of the very liberal immigration scholars because in my words, they were actually the academic version of Trump's shithole countries, which is the academic pushback that I was getting about who are these people who are going to be coming from Africa, and I that's when I realized that I some of the provocative stuff that I had in the book, I thought I need to look into this and convince these people. So it was not so much as sometimes it's you learn and you realize that, okay, I was on the wrong track. This is not enough, or this is not how I should be thinking. There are other times when you actually think that, no, there's a way I need to actually address this issue to change the discourse as well as knowledge on a particular issue. And that can be very helpful in the sense that you are basically honing your own ideas, going back to research to see how do I present this topic in a way that people begin, their first reaction is to actually fight back, and then you actually provide evidence, say it in such a way that then you begin to see that they get your point. So feedback is very important, but there could be various levels of feedback. There could be feedback in terms of your challenging discourse on that issue. It could just be feedback that, you fill this thing with a lot of data, nobody's going to read you. So that would be another kind of feedback where you're saying, I need to improve my writing. Or there could be third feedback where could be they're saying that, well, this is all known. What are you saying? Is there anything new you're saying? Or, we all know this. So there can be various levels of feedback, and I think they're very important. As writers, we have to be open to accepting, to actually listening to all the feedback. I feel like the most critical, harsh feedback is what I need before the book gets published so that I can address them, right? Yeah, thanks.
Definitely. Yeah. Anything to add? Anybody?
I guess like most of the topic has been addressed, but I have seen also people coming in certain groups, right? Like, writing groups or, colleagues with expertise. So folks who might be interested in literally writing, they find like the group of writers, like, so sometimes the idea is being presented or the first drafts are being shared, and I've seen the open invitation to provide feedback, for instance, for some kind of conference presentations to be turned into an article or a book and whatnot. So I feel looking for those communities could be helpful to get further feedback.
Yeah, I imagine that would be very helpful.
I agree that opening yourself to feedback is critical.
Yeah, and it can be hard, right? Sometimes
Yes.
it's not great to hear that, but that's as you're saying, sometimes that's the most important thing you need to hear, is the critical feedback so that you can redirect and respond. With respect to folks, I mean, we're talking about academic publishing houses here, I think. Well, you had Springer, I think, MASHURA and Columbia University Press for the other two. For folks who don't know where to start that search, I'm going to fling out an idea, knowing nothing, having never published a book, and then you can correct me where I'm going wrong. But I would think that if you were starting this process, you might look at books for similar audiences, maybe, and do a sort of a unofficial, so look at the books on your shelf. Where would you, who would again think of the importance of the audience, and other books that you would consider of the same ilk or genre, and maybe starting with those, because I'm not really quite sure where to start there. What are your thoughts?
So that's a great suggestion. Like when I first thought of writing a book, someone made the same suggestion to me. Someone with my kind of a background, who generally just wrote just wrote articles. And in my profession at that time, writing book didn't advance my career. But this was what, a colleague suggested, that why don't you read a few books, which could be, sometimes a book could just be literature review written in a very easy style. So that's what I was recommended to me, to read some books on a particular topic, and that would, clear up your vision of what do you think your book is going to be like.
Great, thank you. Sure, Lauren, I don't know if you had other thoughts on that topic too.
Yeah, I think when we do, when maybe we are looking for certain literature, we go look at the reference page and then look them up. And then I think for the books, probably like your suggestions works really well, because nowadays, like you can go to publishing house and then really see what they have published. Sometimes they might have series on certain topics. So that would be easier for you to figure out where your book may fit, right? And what would be some of the areas or the topics they publish. So that way, like you can limit your search to the ones who would potentially be interested in your book.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, for example, I have an idea now that I'm working on, and I think it would probably be directed towards more feminist press or something of that sort. So I think just thinking about your target audience when you're starting is important.
Very helpful. Thank you all. We're getting some questions too about sort of tips and tricks and tools. So I'm really eager to dig into this. And this hit my mind too when you were talking about outlines, Neeraj, because I'm terrible at writing outlines. What I find much more comfortable is doing something in a PowerPoint and then using that as an outline. It's the same darn thing, but for whatever reason, I find it easier to do in PowerPoint than I do by typing it into Word or handwriting it. So someone asked here, do you carry a notebook with you? Do you have a vision board? Do you use Word? Or is there software that you use that helps you move your project forward? So you've got an audience here hungry for tips of the trade that you might be able to share. Anybody who wants to.
One tip that I got from my nephew, who's much, much, much younger than me, when I was writing my first book, was that and I was struggling, I was really struggling. And I was thinking that it's not in me to write this book. And he says, when you're traveling around, why don't you use your phone to write your thoughts? And I realized that I'm actually thinking much better when I'm not on my desk. And whenever I was traveling, I started writing the book on my phone. Not that I was writing chapters, I wasn't, but it was paragraphs after paragraph, and it allowed me to think. The pressure of writing it on the desk was lifted. And I thought it was actually a very good advice to allow yourself to think about what the various parts of the book are going to be, and have some ideas and thoughts wherever you are. If you could just jot it down, that turned out to be very helpful for me. Yeah,
because your phone is always with you, right? But we don't go anywhere without these phones, so that's a good tip. Yeah. Other tips?
For me, well, I'm thinking about when I was writing my oral history thesis, and I made a long list of all the things I needed to do in my apartment. And I was talking to my son, who's a psychology professor, and he said to me, "Mom, I bet you've done everything on that list except write your thesis. Now sit down and write your thesis." But for me, again, I'm coming back to quotes, and I think this is partly related to both my clinical work and my narrative work, not just quotes from authors. But if a client of mine says something that resonates with me, and I think someday I'm going to write using that idea, I'll just write it down. And at the beginning of every one of my chapters, there is a quote, and some of them are from clients, and they're things that I may have written down years ago. But for me, that's how I organize and frame what I write.
Yeah. For me, it was more accountability and organization because given how we were working in a team, there was always like a list of tasks to do by certain times. And that pushed us to really work on stuff like, we need to get edits done by this time. We need to, do the literature review for the chapter we are writing by this time. And that was really, really helpful. And that blocked out time, writing time, where we just sit and seeing other folks working and like with their faces on Zoom, where it didn't allow you to get distracted and work on other things because that was the goal. So even if it is like, sometimes I started doing this for all other writing projects as well, where we would sit in front of each other. Like we might not be working on the same project, but we are devoting this time for writing, and we check in with the goals at the beginning and then check in at the end. And it's always helpful to get things done. Otherwise, they will disappear among other tasks and other projects.
Yeah, I know a couple of these. They're not that common, but I do know a couple of writing accountability groups and people who've really been able to move projects forward. And as you were just saying, sure, they're not writing on the same thing. But it's like, I'm going to meet you in this coffee shop, or I'm going to meet you on Zoom, and we are going to spend an hour and a half writing. And here's my goals for the session. What are your goals for the session? And then having just to report back to each other. And I would imagine that's really, really helpful because I'm someone who needs a lot of structure, and so that would help me, that accountability and knowing I'm just going to have to report back to somebody at the end of the hour and a half would be very motivating for me, I think. And someone had sent in a question ahead of time. I'm a first-gen social worker. Should I be considering this? How would I get started? What words of advice or encouragement would you give to someone in that position?
I would just say that, if you're writing a book, think of are you going to enjoy it? That's a very important part. I think for me, the biggest part of writing the book was, did I get enough out of it? Not in terms of sales or anything, but more in terms of, did I learn anything in the process? Have I enjoyed anything in the process? So, I don't think being a first generation social worker is a limitation. But the question that you have to ask is, one, am I ready? Do I have thoughts to write a book? Secondly, am I going to enjoy it? There are returns to writing a book are, I believe, a lot more internal to yourself than to in terms of career wise. I don't know whether there's that much return to writing a book.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are multiple reasons why people will consider, right? So, and especially in social work, I'm not sure if we are really writing for profit. Like, I probably don't even see what I am getting from this book, because my goal was like to really have something that I am going to use because I was needing this as an educator, and I wanted to share and bring that into my classroom. But there are many things that you could do. You could have a unique experience you want to share. Many people write for therapy. Many people write to self-express, right? And there is audience for different types of books. And I feel like there is a lot to share, right? Because, especially when the experiences that you might have might be unique to you, and there is a need to learn from that experience and knowledge.
I agree with that. And one of the things that I would say also is as ideas come to you, just write them down. And eventually you'll have a collection of ideas and you may have a place to go with them in terms of the structure of a book, or start with an article. I mean, that's what I did. I started with an article. I wrote about the intersection of oral history and therapy. Because those were the two things that I knew, and I was interested in sort of the meeting space between them. And from there, things just evolved over time.
Start with the seeds, right? And then grow them. I can't believe we're almost out of time. Is that correct? We just have 2 minutes left. So I want to thank these fantastic panelists. I learned a ton from this, and I just want to give you, if you had a few words to share before we sign off, and I'll start with you, Lauren. We'll go in reverse alpha order this time. Anything you would like our audience to know about book writing or social writing?
I have this thing I tell myself when I'm writing and I feel blocked, which is you can always do the laundry. So I guess my advice would be that if you feel like you're blocked, get up and do something completely different, and then just let it sort of come to you, because it will. That's my.
Thank you, Lauren. Neeraj.
Well, just that if you're working on a book and you're stuck, just get back to it. What Lauren was saying, that just give yourself some time, come back to it. If you're writing something and you think that it's not well written, just come back to it the next day. And I think that's the beauty of editing, is that the more you do, the better it gets. So those are my words.
That's great. And MASHURA, you get the last word.
I would say consistency would be something that probably will be very helpful in the process, and simplicity of language is always helpful regardless of what type of the book you're writing. But at the same time, I think this was the thread throughout this conversation today. Getting your community and support is necessary, whether it is just, the support for the content, editing, or just the support like to cheer you on, because there are so many people in the life like who make it happen, right? Or make sure that you have that time, especially if you have other responsibilities. So I think that's important. One thing that I learned actually from this experience, don't get stuck with these frames that are given to us in terms of what the book should look like or shouldn't, right? Because there are many, many different ways of writing the book, getting creative, and really not like, don't get stuck with, that the book should look like this or that, because there are a lot of other forms of the books that still bring a lot of value.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. There's a comment by someone in the Q&A that just said, so glad I gifted myself this hour. I feel the same way. It's really been a gift to listen to all of you and to engage with all of you. I'm struck by the emphasis on community and collaboration, and I have to wonder if this wasn't a social work group, if that would have come through so strongly. I suspect not. So that's another huge asset. So I want to thank all of you. I want to thank everybody who tuned in, and Adam and Chin for bringing us all together. And I'm going to make a confession as I close. And I've been terrified of this notion of a book. I've submitted my first book proposal. I was terrified. And so I just want to say fear is normal, right? And I don't have an answer yet, but I'm scared. I'll keep you posted. But anyway, thank you for the inspiration that you've all provided today. Adam, anything you want to say to close us out?
Just thank you, everybody. What a fantastic conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, everybody.